Hello. Today I'll be discussing my research exploring how to produce graphical representations of cognitive maps from local field potential data using SLAM algorithms. We're going to start by explaining what a cognitive map is and why we would want to produce a representation of one. So, the term was coined in 1948 by Edward Tolman and means an internal neural representation which allows an animal to encode, store, recall, and decode information about the relative locations and attributes of an environment. So the idea is that we all have these maps in our brains, and we're using those maps to navigate through our environment and keep track of our position relative to other things. The idea was really influential and has since been supported by the discovery of many other neurons with spatially biased firing activity, which are now thought to be used by the brain in its construction and maintenance of these cognitive maps. So feel free to pause the video here to get a more comprehensive idea of the history of and the cells believed to be involved in the cognitive map. Even though the term cognitive map has been really widely used in the literature for years, nobody has before attempted to produce a representation of one of these maps. So I think a representation of a cognitive map would be useful for two reasons. The first simply as a visualization tool. For example, we could visualize the difference in accuracy of a decoded cognitive map generated while a rat was foraging freely in an environment compared to a decoded cognitive map generated while a rat was exploring attentively. So, secondly, I think this system could be used as an experimental tool to allow neuroscientists to perform a variety of novel behavioral studies that could examine to what extent and in what contexts a rat's cognitive map representation of an environment informs its navigational decisions as it performs tasks within that environment. For example, will a rat always take a route that is believed to be shortest, as inferred from its cognitive map, or will it sometimes take a longer route? And if so, under what conditions? We could also look at maps generated by data from different brain regions, which will give us insight both into which brain regions are sufficient to create a cognitive map, but might also tell us something about the role of each brain region in the construction of these maps by examining the different properties of maps coming from different brain regions. So to the right here is an image of the data collection process for this project, showing the map which we will try to decode in the end. But how are we going to do this? Well, the algorithm we're going to use to generate our maps is a modified version of the RatSLAM algorithm. So SLAM stands for simultaneous localization and mapping. Localization being the problem of taking data which somehow encodes location information and using it to predict location. And mapping is the converse problem of getting similar data, but this time including location and using it to build up a map of an environment that an agent is exploring. And SLAM is both of these problems at once. So building up a map of an environment while also keeping track of an agent's position within that environment. As you can imagine, it's a really common problem with autonomous cars, any autonomous vehicles, but attempting to apply any SLAM solutions to neural data is completely novel. And the rat part of the RatSLAM algorithm comes from the fact that this version of SLAM was inspired by place cells and head direction cells and the ways that the rat brain uses these to navigate. And the thinking here that as this algorithm has some biological inspiration, the maps that we generate will be more biologically plausible. And on the right here, you can see a video of a RatSLAM system working, applied to a car with a webcam attached to the bonnet, driving around a Los Angeles suburb. The key thing to note about the RatSLAM algorithm is that the camera is being used for two things here. The first is to infer velocity, and the second is to predict if and when an agent has been to a location before. And the reason I bring that up is because if we want to extend this system to accept LFP input, those are the two things we need to build. A system to infer velocity from LFP, and also a system to take two pieces of LFP data and decide if they had been generated while the rat was in the same position. And to tackle both of these problems, we use this, a deep learning framework originally described by Freud et al. In 2021. And this is able to decode a really large variety of sensory and behavioral variables directly from wavelet decomposition images of wideband neural data, so without any spike sorting. Some of the wavelet images are shown on the right of the screen now. They come from tetrode LFP recordings and they're transformed into wavelet images in a similar way to the way a Fourier transform works. And to decode these wavelet images, we use a deep network that uses shared weights across channels, so it'll learn representations of general patterns and shapes, not just for one channel, but for all of them. and that helps speed up learning and prevent overfitting. But apart from that, it's a very normal network, series of downsampling convolutional layers, then a series of fully connected layers with a separate fully connected layer for each output, and then the outputs are returned. And even though it's simple, this framework has been shown to achieve state-of-the-art location decoding results and is also really good at predicting speed and head direction. So we implemented a modified version of this Frey architecture and trained it on data collected by Nadine Becker, formerly of the Matt Jones lab. I then fed the output of this network into a modified RatSLAM architecture, where the velocity system is just using the decoded speed and direction of this network, and the system for figuring out if and when an agent has visited a location before uses the difference in decoded positions for two pieces of LFP data. So we trained a deep network on around 30 minutes of training data for 3 rats, and we used the remaining 5 or 6 minutes of data for each rat as test data. And we used that bit of data as input to the now trained deep networks, and we plug the output of those networks into our modified RatSLAM algorithm. And here is the result for one of the rats. What we're looking at here on the left, the pink scatter plot is the true map, with the green dot being the true current position of the rat, and the maroon network overlaid on top of that is the decoded cognitive map, with the dark green node being the rat's estimated current location within that map. And on the right, the red arrow is the estimated direction of the rat, and the green its true location. You can see now that it's done, that it's created a really high fidelity map, and you'll see that there's actually very little aliasing in the map as the rat goes back and re-explores previously visited locations. But it didn't work that well just for one rat. Here's the decoded maps for all 3 rats, each from about 6 minutes of test data and using models trained on around 30 minutes of training data with a separate network trained for each rat. And these maps represent the first ever demonstration of decoding and visualizing cognitive maps. And this ability to visualize and quantify the cognitive map of an animal opens up new varieties, new avenues of research into the role of these maps in navigation and decision making. And we believe that this work will help to shed light on the ways that animals form and maintain these maps of their environments. I'd like to thank my supervision team, Cian O'Donnell, Matt Jones and Nathan Lepora. I'd like to thank Nadine Becker for collecting the data that we use in this project, and I'd like to thank the Interactive AI CDT and the UKRI